Good morning and welcome to the latest 3 chapters from James Herriot's book It Shouldn't Happen to a Vet. Today's chapters are 19, 20 and 21. So, firstly, chapter 19. There didn't seem much point in a millionaire filling up football pools coupons, but it was one of the motive forces in old Harold Denham's life. It made a tremendous bond between us because, despite his devotion to the pools, Harold knew nothing about football, had never seen a match, and was unable to name a single player in league football. And when he found that I could discourse knowledgeably not only about Everton and Preston North End, but even about Arbroath and Cowdenbeath, the respect with which he had always treated me deepened into a wide-eyed deference. Of course, we had first met over his animals. He had an assortment of dogs, cats, rabbits, budgies, and goldfish, which made me a frequent visitor to the dusty mansion, whose Victorian turrets, peeping above their sheltering woods, could be seen for miles around Darrowby. When I first knew him, the circumstances of my visits were entirely normal. His fox terrier had cut its pad, or the old grey tabby was having trouble with its sinusitis. But later on I began to wonder. He called me out so often on a Wednesday, and the excuse was at times so trivial, that I began seriously to suspect that there was nothing wrong with the animal, but that Harold was in difficulty with his 9 results, or the easy 6. I could never be quite sure, but it was funny how he always received me with the same words. "Ah, Mr. Herriot, how are your pools?" He used to say the word in a long-drawn, loving way. Pools. This inquiry had been unvarying ever since I had won 16 shillings 1 week on the free draws. I can never forget the awe with which he fingered the little slip from Littlewoods, looking unbelievingly from it to the postal order. That was the only time I was a winner, but it made no difference. I was still the oracle, unchallenged, supreme. Harold never won anything ever. The Denhams were a family of note in North Yorkshire. The immensely wealthy industrialists of the last century had become leaders in the world of agriculture. They were gentlemen farmers, who used their money to build up pedigree herds of dairy cows or pigs. They ploughed out the high, stony moorland and fertilised it and made it grow crops. They drained sour bogs and made them yield potatoes and turnips. They were the chairmen of committees, masters of foxhounds, leaders of the county society. But Harold had opted out of all that at an early age. He had refuted the age-old dictum that you can't be happy doing absolutely nothing. All day and every day he pottered around his house and his few untidy acres, uninterested in the world outside, not entirely aware of what was going on in his immediate vicinity, but utterly content. I don't think he ever gave a thought to other people's opinions, which was just as well, because they were often unkind. His brother, the eminent Basil Denham, referred to him invariably as "that bloody fool," and with the country people it was often "nobbut 9 pence inch shilling." Personally, I always found something appealing in him. He was kind, friendly, with a sense of fun, and I enjoyed going to his house. He and his wife ate all their meals in the kitchen, and in fact seemed to spend most of their time there, so I usually went round the back of the house. On this particular day, it was to see his Great Dane bitch, female dog, which had just had pups and seemed unwell. Since it wasn't Wednesday, I felt that there really might be something amiss with her, and hurried round. Harold gave me his usual greeting. He had the most attractive voice, round, fruity, mellow, like a bishop's, and for the 100th time I thought how odd it was to hear those organ-like vocal cords intoning such incongruities as Mansfield Town or Bradford City. "I wonder if you could advise me, Mr. Herriot," he said, as we left the kitchen and entered a long, ill-lit passage. "I'm searching for an away winner, and I wondered about Sunderland at Aston Villa." I stopped and fell into an attitude of deep thought while Harold regarded me anxiously. "Well, I'm not sure, Mr. Denham," I replied. "Sunderland are a good side, but I happen to know that Race Carter's auntie isn't too well at present, and it could easily affect his game this Saturday." I assumed Race Carter was a 1930s footballer. Harold looked crestfallen, and he nodded his head gravely a few times. Then he looked closely at me for a few seconds and broke into a shout of laughter. "Ah, Mr. Herriot, you're pulling my leg again." He seized my arm, gave it a squeeze, and shuffled along the passage, chuckling deeply. We traversed a labyrinth of gloomy cobweb passages before he led the way into a little gun-room. My patient was lying on a raised wooden dog bed, and I recognised her as the enormous Dane I had seen leaping around at previous visits. I had never treated her, but my first sight of her had dealt a blow at one of my newfound theories, that you didn't find big dogs in big houses. Times without number I had critically observed bull mastiffs, Alsatians, and old English sheepdogs catapulting out of the tiny back street dwellings of Darrowby, pulling their helpless owners on the end of a lead, while in the spacious rooms and wide acres of the stately homes I saw nothing but border terriers and Jack Russells. But Harold would have to be different. He patted the dog's head. "She had the puppies yesterday, and she's got a nasty dark discharge. She's eating well, but I'd like you to look her over. Great Danes, like most of the big breeds, are usually placid animals." And the bitch didn't move as I took her temperature. She lay on her side, listening contentedly to the squeals of her family as the little blind creatures climbed over each other to get at the engorged teats. "Yes, she's got a slight fever, and you're right about the discharge." I gently palpated the long hollow of the flank. "I don't think there's another pup there, but I'd better have a feel inside her to make sure. Could you bring me some warm water, soap, and a towel, please?" As the door closed behind Harold, I looked idly around the gun-room. It wasn't much bigger than a cupboard, and since another of Harold's idiosyncrasies was that he never killed anything, was devoid of guns. The glass cases contained only musty-bound volumes of Blackwood's magazine and Country Life. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, wondering why the old chap was taking so long. Then I turned to look at an old print on the wall. It was the usual hunting scene, and I was peering through the grimy glass and wondering why they always drew those horses flying over the stream with such impossible long legs, when I heard a sound behind me. It was a faint growl, a deep rumble, soft but menacing. I turned and saw the dog rising very slowly from her bed. She wasn't getting to her feet in the normal way of dogs. It was as though she were being lifted up by strings somewhere in the ceiling, the legs straightening almost imperceptibly, the body rigid, every hair bristling. All the time she glared at me unblinkingly, and for the first time in my life I realised the meaning of blazing eyes. I had only once seen anything like this before, and it was on the cover of an old copy of The Hound of the Baskervilles. At the time I had thought the artist ridiculously fanciful, but here were two eyes filled with the same yellow fire and fixed unwaveringly on mine. She thought I was after her pups, of course. After all, her master had gone, and there was only this stranger standing motionless and silent in the corner of the room, obviously up to no good. One thing was sure, she was going to come at me any second, and I blessed the luck that had made me stand right by the door. Carefully I inched my left hand towards the handle, as the dog still rose with terrifying slowness, still rumbling deep in her chest. I had almost reached the handle when I made the mistake of making a quick grab for it. Just as I touched the metal, the dog came out of the bed like a rocket and sank her teeth into my wrist. I thumped her over the head with my right fist, and she let go and seized me high up on the inside of the left thigh. This really made me yell out, and I don't know just what my immediate future would have been if I hadn't bumped up against the only chair in the room. It was old and flimsy, but it saved me. As the dog, apparently tiring of gnawing my leg, made a sudden leap at my face, I snatched the chair up and fended her off. The rest of my spell in the gun room was a sort of parody of a lion taming act, and would have been richly funny to an impartial observer. In fact, in later years I have often wished I could have a cine film of the episode, but at the time, with that great animal stalking me round those few cramped yards of space, the blood trickling down my leg, and only a rickety chair to protect me, I didn't feel a bit like laughing. There was a dreadful dedication in the way she followed me, and those maddened eyes never left my face for an instant. The pups, furious at the unceremonious removal of their rightful source of warmth and nourishment, were crawling blindly across the bed and bawling, all 9 of them at the top of their voices. The din acted as a spur to the dog, and the louder it became, the more she pressed home her attack. Every few seconds she would launch herself at me, and I would prance about, stabbing at her with my chair in best circus fashion. Once she bore me back against the wall, chair and all, on her hind legs. She was about as tall as me, and I had a disturbing close-up of the snarling, gaping jaws. My biggest worry was that my chair was beginning to show signs of wear. The dog had already crunched 2 of the spars effortlessly away, and I tried not to think of what would happen if the whole thing finally disintegrated. But I was working my way back to the door, and when I felt the handle at my back, I knew I had to do something about it. I gave a final, intimidating shout, threw the remains of the chair at the dog, and dived out into the corridor. As I slammed the door behind me and leaned against it, I could feel the panels quivering as the big animal threw itself against the wood. I was sitting on the floor with my back against the passage wall, pants round my ankles, examining my wounds, when I saw Harold pass across the far end, pottering vaguely along with a basin of steaming water held in front of him and a towel over his shoulder. I could understand now why he had been so long. He had been wandering around like that all the time. Being Harold, it was just possible he had been lost in his own house. Or maybe he was just worrying about his 4 ways. Back at Skeldale House, I had to endure some unkind remarks about my straddling gait, but later, in my bedroom, the smile left Siegfried's face as he examined my leg. "Right up there, by God!" He gave a low-awed whistle. "You know, James, you've often made jokes about what a savage dog might do to us one day. Well, I tell you, boy, it damn nearly happened to you." Chapter 20. This was my second winter in Darrowby, so I didn't feel the same sense of shock when it started to be really rough in November. When they were getting a drizzle of rain down there on the plain, the high country was covered in a few hours by a white blanket which filled in the roads, smoothed out familiar landmarks, transformed our world into something strange and new. This was what they meant on the radio when they talked about snow on high ground. When the snow started in earnest, it had a strangling effect on the whole district. Traffic crawled laboriously between the mounds thrown up by the snowploughs. Herne Fell hung over Darrowby like a great gleaming whale, and in the town the people dug paths to their gates, and cleared the drifts from their front doors. They did it without fuss, with the calm of long use, and in the knowledge that they would probably have to do it again tomorrow. Every new fall struck a fresh blow at the vets. We managed to get to most of our cases, but we lost a lot of sweat in the process. Sometimes we were lucky and were able to bump along in the wake of a council plough, but more often we drove as far as we could and walked the rest of the way. On the morning when Mr. Clayton of Pike House rang up, we had had a night of continuous snow. "Young beast with a touch of cold," he said. "Will you come?" To get to his place you had to cross over Pike Edge and then drop down into a little valley. It was a lovely drive in the summer, but I wondered. "What's the road like?" I asked. "Road? Mr. Clayton's reaction was typically airy. Farmers in the less accessible places always brushed aside such queries. "Road's right enough. Just take a bit of care and you'll get here without any trouble." Siegfried wasn't so sure. "You'll certainly have to walk over the top, and it's doubtful whether the ploughs will have cleared the lower road. It's up to you." "Oh, I'll have a go. There's not much doing this morning, and I feel like a bit of exercise." In the yard I found that old Boardman had done a tremendous job in his quiet way. He had dug open the big double doors and cleared a way for the cars to get out. I put what I thought I would need into a small rucksack, some expectorant mixture, a tub of elecouterie, a syringe, and a few ampoules of pneumonia serum. Then I threw the most important item of my winter equipment, a broad-bladed shovel, into the back and left. The bigger roads had already been cleared by the council ploughs which had been clanking past Skeldale House since before dawn, but the surface was rough and I had a slow, bumpy ride. It was more than 10 miles to the Clayton farm, and it was one of those iron days when the frost piled thickly on the windscreen, blotting out everything within minutes. But this morning I was triumphant. I had just bought a wonderful new invention. A couple of strands of wire mounted on a strip of Bakelite and fastened to the windscreen with rubber suckers. It worked from the car batteries and cleared a small space of vision. No more did I have to climb out warily and scrub and scratch at the frozen glass every half mile or so. I sat peering delightedly through a flawlessly clear semicircle about 8 inches wide at the countryside unwinding before me like a film show. The grey stone villages silent and withdrawn under their smothering white cloak, the low burdened branches of the roadside trees. I was enjoying it so much that I hardly noticed the ache in my toes. Freezing feet were the rule in those days before car heaters, especially when you could see the road flashing past through the holes in the floorboards. On long journeys I really began to suffer towards the end. It was like that today when I got out of the car at the foot of the Pike Edge Road. My fingers, too, throbbed painfully as I stamped around and swung my arms. The ploughs hadn't even attempted to clear the little side road which wound its way upwards and into the valley beyond. Its solid, creamy, wall-to-wall filling said, "No, you can't come up here," with that detached finality I had come to know so well. But as always, even in my disappointment, I looked with wonder at the shapes the wind had sculpted in the night, flowing thoughts of the most perfect smoothness, tapering to the finest of points, deep hollows with knife-edge rims, soaring cliffs with overhanging margins, almost transparent in their delicacy. Hitching the rucksack on my shoulder, I felt a kind of subdued elation. With a leather golf jacket buttoned up to my neck and an extra pair of thick socks under my Wellingtons, I felt ready for anything. No doubt I considered there was something just a bit dashing and gallant in the picture of the dedicated young vet with his magic potions on his back, battling against the odds to succour a helpless animal. I stood for a moment gazing at the fell, curving clean and cold into the sullen sky. An expectant hush lay on the fields, the frozen river and the still trees as I started off. I kept up a good pace, first over a bridge with the river white and silent beneath, then up and up, picking my way over the drifts till the road twisted, almost invisible, under some low cliffs. Despite the cold, the sweat was beginning to prick on my back when I got to the top. I looked around me. I had been up here several times in June and July, and I could remember the sunshine, the smell of the warm grass, and the scent of flowers and pines that came up the hill from the valley below. But it was hard to relate the smiling landscape of last summer with this desolation. The flat moorland on the fell top was a white immensity, rolling away to the horizon with the sky pressing down like a dark blanket. I could see the farm down there in its hollow, and it, too, looked different. Small, remote, like a charcoal drawing against the hills bulking smooth and white beyond. A pine wood made a dark smudge on the slopes, but the scene had been wiped clean of most of its familiar features. I could see the road only in places. The walls were covered over most of their length, but the farm was visible all the way. I'd gone about half a mile towards it when a sudden gust of wind blew up the surface snow into a cloud of fine particles. Just for a few seconds I found myself completely alone. The farm, the surrounding moor, everything disappeared, and I had an eerie sense of isolation till the veil cleared. It was hard going in the deep snow and in the drifts. I sank over the tops of my Wellingtons. I kept at it, head down, till within a few hundred yards of the stone buildings. I was just thinking that it had all been pretty easy, really, when I looked up and saw a waving curtain of 1,000,000 black dots bearing down on me. I quickened my steps, and just before the blizzard hit me, I marked the position of the farm. But after 10 minutes stumbling and slithering, I realised I had missed the place. I was heading for a shape that didn't exist. It was etched only in my mind. I stood for a few moments, feeling again the chilling sense of isolation. I was convinced I had gone too far to the left, and after a few gasping breaths, struck off to the right. It wasn't long before I knew I had gone in the wrong direction again. I began to fall into deep holes up to the armpits in the snow, reminding me that the ground was not really flat on these high moors, but pitted by countless peat hags. As I struggled on, I told myself that the whole thing was ridiculous. I couldn't be far from the warm fireside at Pike House. This wasn't the North Pole. But my mind went back to the great empty stretch of moor beyond the farm, and I had to stifle a feeling of panic. The numbing cold seemed to erase all sense of time. Soon I had no idea of how long I'd been falling into the holes and crawling out. I did know that each time it was getting harder work dragging myself out, and it was becoming more and more tempting to sit down and rest, even sleep. There was something hypnotic in the way the big soft flakes brushed noiselessly across my skin and mounted thickly on my closed eyes. I was trying to shut out the conviction that if I fell down many more times I wouldn't get up, when a dark shape hovered suddenly ahead. Then my outflung arms touched something hard and rough. Unbelievably, I felt my way over the square stone blocks till I came to a corner. Beyond that was a square of light. It was the kitchen window of the farm. Thumping on the door, I leaned against the smooth timbers, mouth gaping, chest heaving agonisingly. My immense relief must have bordered on hysteria, because it seemed to me that when the door was opened, the right thing would be to fall headlong into the room. My mind played with the picture of the family crowding round the prostrate figure, plying him with brandy. When the door did open, however, something kept me on my feet. Mr. Clayton stood there for a few seconds, apparently unmoved by the sight of the distraught snowman in front of him. "Oh, it's you, Mr. Herriot. You couldn't have come better. I've just finished me dinner. Hang on a minute till I get me hat. Beast's just across the yard." He reached behind the door, stuck a battered trilby on his head, put his hands in his pockets, and sauntered over the cobbles, whistling. He knocked up the latch of the calf house, and with a profound sense of release, I stepped inside, away from the relentless cold, the sucking, swirling snow, into an animal warmth and the scent of hay. As I rid myself of my rucksack, 4 long-haired little bullocks regarded me calmly from over a hurdle, their jaws moving rhythmically. They appeared as unconcerned at my appearance as their owner. They showed a mild interest, nothing more. Behind the shaggy heads I could see a 5th small beast with a sack tied round it and a purulent discharge coming from its nose. It reminded me of the reason for my visit. As my numb fingers fumbled in a pocket for my thermometer, a great gust of wind buffeted the door, setting the latch clicking softly and sending a faint powdering of snow into the dark interior. Mr. Clayton turned and rubbed the pane of the single small window with his sleeve. Picking his teeth with his thumbnail, he peered out at the howling blizzard. "Aye," he said, and belched pleasurably. "It's a plain sort of day." Chapter 21. As I waited for Siegfried to give me my morning list, I pulled my scarf higher till it almost covered my ears, turned up the collar of my overcoat, and buttoned it tightly under my chin. Then I drew on a pair of holed woolen gloves. A biting north wind was driving the snow savagely past the window, almost parallel with the ground, obliterating the street and everything else with big swirling flakes. Siegfried bent over the daybook. Now, let's see what we've got. Barnet, Gill, Sunter, Dent, Cartwright. He began to scribble on a pad. Oh, and I'd better see Scruton's calf. You've been attending it, I know, but I'm going right past the door. Can you tell me about it? Yes, it's been breathing a bit fast and running a temperature around 103. I don't think there's any pneumonia there. In fact, I rather suspect it may be developing diphtheria. It has a bit of a swelling on the jaw, and the throat glands are up. All the time I was speaking, Siegfried continued to write on the pad, and only stopped once to whisper to Miss Harbottle. Then he looked up brightly. Pneumonia, hey? Have you been treating it? No, I said I didn't think it was pneumonia. I've been injecting Prontosil, and I left some liniment to rub into the throat region. But Siegfried was writing hard again. He said nothing till he had made out 2 lists. He tore one from the pad and gave it to me. Right, you've been applying liniment to the chest. Suppose it might do a bit of good. Which liniment exactly? Lin-methyl-sol. But they're rubbing it on the calf's throat, not the chest. But Siegfried had turned away to tell Miss Harbottle the order of his visits, and I found myself talking to the back of his head. Finally, he straightened up and came away from the desk. Well, that's fine. You have your list. Let's get on. But halfway across the floor he hesitated in his stride and turned back. Why the devil are you rubbing that liniment on the calf's throat? Well, I thought it might relieve the inflammation a bit. But, James, why should there be any inflammation there? Don't you think the liniment would do more good on the chest wall? Siegfried was wearing his patient look again. No, I don't. Not in a case of calf diphtheria. Siegfried put his head on one side, and a smile of saintly sweetness crept over his face. He laid his hand on my shoulder. My dear old James, perhaps it would be a good idea if you started right at the beginning. Take all the time you want. There's no hurry. Speak slowly and calmly, and then you won't become confused. You told me you were treating a calf with pneumonia. Now take it from there. I thrust my hands deep into my coat pockets and began to churn among the thermometers and scissors and little bottles which always dwelt there. Look, I told you right at the start that I didn't think there was any pneumonia, but that I suspected early diphtheria. There was also a bit of a fever, 103. Siegfried was looking past me at the window. God, just look at that snow. We're going to have some fun getting round today. He dragged his eyes back to my face. Don't you think that with a temperature of 103 you should be injecting some Prontosil? He raised his arms sideways and let them fall. Just a suggestion, James. I wouldn't interfere for the world, but I honestly think that the situation calls for a little Prontosil. But hell, I am using it, I shouted. I told you that way back, but you weren't listening. I've been doing my damnedest to get this across to you, but what chance have I got? Come, dear boy, come. No need to upset yourself. Siegfried's face was transfigured by an internal radiance. Sweetness and charity, forgiveness, tolerance, and affection flowed from him in an enveloping wave. I battled with an impulse to kick him swiftly on the shin. James, the voice was caressing. I've not the slightest doubt you tried in your own way to tell me about this case, but we haven't all got the gift of communication. You're the most excellent fellow, but must apply yourself to this. It is simply a matter of marshalling your facts and presenting them in an orderly manner. Then you wouldn't get confused and mixed up as you've done this morning. It's only a question of practice, I'm sure. He gave an encouraging wave of the hand and was gone. I strode quickly through to the stock room, and seeing a big empty cardboard box on the floor, dealt it a vicious kick. I put so much venom into it that my foot went clear through the cardboard, and I was trying to free myself when Tristan came in. He had been stoking the fire, and had witnessed the conversation. He watched silently as I plunged about the room, swearing and trying to shake the box loose. "What's up, Jim? Has my big brother been getting under your skin?" I got rid of the box at last and sank down on one of the lower shelves. "I don't know. Why should he be getting under my skin now? I've known him quite a long time, and he's always been the same. He's never been any different, but it hasn't bothered me before. Not like this, anyway. Any other time I'd laugh that sort of thing off. What the hell's wrong with me?" Tristan put down his coal bucket and looked at me thoughtfully. "There's nothing much wrong with you, Jim. But I can tell you one thing. You've been just a bit edgy since you went out with the Alderson woman." "Oh, God," I groaned and closed my eyes. "Don't remind me. Anyway, I've not seen her or heard from her since, so that's the end of that, and I can't blame her." Tristan pulled out his woodbines and squatted down by the coal bucket. "Yes, that's all very well. But look at you. You're suffering, and there's no need for it. All right, you had a disastrous night, and she's given you the heave-ho, old heave-ho. Well, so what? Do you know how many times I've been spurned?" "Spurned? I never even got started." "Very well, then. But you're going around like a bullock with a bellyache. Forget it, lad, and get out into the big world. The rich tapestry of life is waiting for you out there. I've been watching you, working all hours, and when you're not working, you're reading up your cases in the textbooks. And I tell you, this dedicated vet thing is all right up to a point. But you've got to live a little. Think of all the lovely little lasses in Darrowby. You can hardly move for them. And every one just waiting for a big handsome chap like you to gallop up on his white horse. Don't disappoint them." He leaned over and slapped my knee. "Tell you what, why don't you let me fix something up? A nice little foursome, just what you need." "Ah, I don't know. I'm not keen, really." "Nonsense," Tristan said. "I don't know why I haven't thought of it before. This monkish existence is bad for you. Leave all the details to me." I decided to have an early night, and was awakened around 11 o'clock by a heavy weight crashing down on the bed. The room was dark, but I seemed to be enveloped in beer-scented smoke. I coughed and sat up. "Is that you, Tris?" "It is indeed." "And the shadowy figure on the end of the bed?" Said the shadowy figure on the end of the bed. "And I bring you glad tidings. You remember Brenda? That little nurse I've seen you around with? The very same? Well, she's got a pal, Connie, who's even more beautiful. The four of us are going dancing at the Polton Institute on Tuesday night." The voice was thick with beery triumph. "You mean me too?" "By God, I do. And you're going to have the best time you've ever had. I'll see to that." He blew a last choking blast of smoke into my face and left chuckling.